Alright, well, good morning there, Tubaneros. I've been watching a series of videos on existential meaninglessness, I guess you could call it. This has provoked some thought on my part, and so I thought I'd attempt to address the issues raised. I don't usually go off into this kind of philosophy. Politics and economics are more my specialty here on the tube. Although these existentialist questions do form the philosophic basis by which we approach the physical world. So those of you who do devote a lot of time to these questions will, I'm sure, have arguments to the points I'm going to raise, and I hope my doing so will help focus your philosophy and give you something to argue against. The basic argument is that life is a bowl of crap and we are the turds floating therein, like in Monty Python and the Life of Brian's Song on the Cross. Life's a piece of shit when you think of it, just bobbling around waiting for the grand flush. The problem here is that we're looking for meaning beyond life itself, abstracted from its physical processes, don't find it, and conclude it's just stupid. This is to me a false reductionism, a false consciousness, as it were, as it becomes a secularized restatement of original sin. Life is just cursed by its intrinsic nature. This is why some people see this argument as a religious dimension, or see a religious dimension to it, however backhanded. And I think that's why it's fundamentally flawed, because life is its own purpose. It has no meaning outside of itself. When you look for it otherwise, you set yourself up to fail. The unfolding and development of life is all we have to base our values, ethics, and logic upon. The rest is non-existence, which is the opposite of sentience and reason. It's a cliche, but it's true. Life is its own virtue and hence its own reward. And there is an innate rationality in matter. This is nothing mystical, metaphysical, or any such thing. I'm not arguing intelligent design. Matter begins as inchoate particles, coalesces as gas, solidifies, forms minerals. The minerals spark into life, and this organic process becomes sentient, and sentience becomes reason. It follows a very clear, inherent pattern, and is therefore logical. The suffering equation involved in this evolution is a byproduct, but not the purpose, not the end result. Means and ends are being conflated. Death may be the end of life, but not its purpose, just as disease is the risk of every living organism, but health is its norm state. The question then becomes, is it possible to have too much of a good thing? And of course it is. I can illustrate this with a real-life example that I've alluded to before. A former employer of mine was a morbidly obese man who tipped the scales at some 700 pounds. Plus, for those of you in different hemispheres, that's about 318 kilos. But anyway, that's a lot of humanity. How did he get so big? Candy, cookies, barbecue, hamburgers, the whole junk and fast food cornucopia of first world affluence. As a depressive type of person, he sought his solace in food, as well as in video poker, which destroyed his estate as surely as the junk food destroyed his body. What was good and sweet in measured amounts became toxic, turned his body upon itself until diabetic sores erupted on his skin to the point where he couldn't stand clothes touching his flesh. Finally, he lost the use of his legs, went into renal failure, lapsed into a coma, and the rest followed pretty quickly. The doctors pulled the plug and engaged in what was, for all intents and purposes, assisted suicide. Antinatalists, I'm sure, can use this as a metaphor for our planet, with life, namely us, being the M&Ms and Cheetos. Some of us around are always good, but too much of us good things becomes a liability for our host, the planet, and begins to strangle and suffocate its biological system and shut it down. We see evidence of this all around. As far as human population goes, we're in an obese state, approaching morbidity, and if it's not taken in hand, we'll have nowhere to go but down. But that toxic effect doesn't address the sweetness of the candy that led to the addiction, the only way this condition could have been achieved. You don't get fat off poison or by eating shit. It's life itself that's the sugar in the candy, that is the addictive substance. By saying life is all just shit with no value is false just by the very way it proliferates, by the way it clings to its existence. Saying life is stupid, pointless, and a compost heap of suffering is, in my view, mistaking the existence of disease for existence as disease. I'll give two concrete examples, two more real people to illustrate the point. You all, I'm sure, know of Anne Frank and her family confined in a secret part of an old house in Amsterdam, hiding from certain death at the hands of Nazi occupation police. In fact, Two families shared that little box of space. During the day, they could not move, talk, even sneeze, burp, or fart without fear of someone hearing and snitching on them. They lived like that for over 2 years. So why didn't they just rip a good toot and get it over with? Have the informer hear them all the sooner rather than wait it out. Had the German security police come stomping up the staircase with unslung Mausers, beating in the door and screaming, "Mach schnell!" Just gets bullshit over instead of playing a dead-end waiting game in a confined little space that had only one likely exit. Because, well, I'm sure a lot of you know the rest of the story. She wrote in her diary, "Despite everything, I believe that people are really good at heart. I simply can't build up my hopes on a foundation consisting of confusion, misery, and death. And the good news is that you don't know how great you can be, how much you can love, what you can accomplish, and what your potential is." And the innate goodness of life was something tangible in herself, her family, and the world around her, in spite of being trapped in a tight little circle of hell. Well, Azov, what do you expect? It's just a dumb 13-year-old girl writing Pollyanna crapola. What does she know about life? If she'd lived long enough, she'd have seen it is all confusion, misery, and death. Otherwise, she and her family wouldn't have been hiding in that secret attic, afraid to sneeze, hoping to hide from a fate from which there was no escape. Now, would they? Well, Anne Frank, in her short life, endured things that most of us never have, and hopefully never will. She insisted that for all the shit in the bowl of life, life is more than just its bowel movements. So I would like you folks to insist on the shit thesis, that you try to come up with something that would negate Anne Frank's faith, if you want to call it faith, her positive belief, that would make her just face up to the inevitable and turn herself in at Auschwitz, ready to end the game, the pretense, the charade. I would think if you wouldn't attempt that, you are avoiding the responsibility of your philosophy. I'll give a second example, one that's dark and negative and totally uninspiring and pretty gruesome. If you've read Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, you might recall a minor character briefly described towards the end of the book, a real convicted and executed killer named Lowell Lee Andrews. Lowell Lee was a compulsive eater who weighed nearly 300 pounds by the time he was 18. He was an honors biology student at the University of Kansas and had even been written up in his hometown as the nicest boy in Walcott, Kansas. He was also a regular churchgoer. Well, it seemed old Lowell Lee had a deep and, as it turned out, violent hatred of his respectable life as useless and having no purpose. Rather than suicide, his self-hatred and rage was projected back onto his family as being at fault for the imposition of such a useless existence, full of nothing but denial and a lot of painful and humiliating rejection, no doubt. So on Thanksgiving of 1958, Lowell Lee Andrews finished reading Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, whose central theme is the rejection of the earth God has created because it imposes senseless suffering on its creatures. Then he took up a .22 caliber rifle and a .22 revolver and slaughtered his sister, mother, and father. I'll describe the scene as Capote reconstructed it. That task completed, he shaved, changed into his best suit, and proceeded to load with a semi-automatic .22 caliber rifle and a Ruger .22 caliber revolver. He fitted the revolver into a hip holster, shouldered the rifle, and ambled down a hall to the parlor, which was dark except for the flickering television screen. He switched on a light, aimed the rifle, pulled the trigger, and hit his sister between the eyes, killing her instantly. He shot his mother 3 times and his father twice. The mother, eyes gaping, arms outstretched, staggered toward him. She tried to speak, her mouth opened, closed, but Lowell Lee said, "Shut up." To be certain she obeyed him, he shot her 3 more times. Mr. Andrews, however, was still alive. Sobbing, whimpering, he thrashed along the floor toward the kitchen, but at the kitchen's threshold the son unholstered his revolver and discharged every chamber, then reloaded the weapon and emptied it again. Altogether, his father absorbed 17 bullets. When the police arrived at the scene of the massacre, and the coroner asked him what funeral arrangements he wished to have made, Andrews replied with a shrug, "I don't care what you do with them." So, there you have Lowell Lee Andrews applying retroactive antinatalism with a vengeance, dispatching his own gene pool and arranging his own execution via the state. He has taken the argument to its revolutionary and, one can argue, logical conclusions. These are not straw man arguments. They're real people who dealt with the pain and suffering of their lives and the purpose of their lives and of life itself. The oppression and injustice they suffered or caused others to suffer was imposed upon them and by them, not by random birth, but by specific actions. Anne Frank insisted there was purpose in the very act of living. A sort of backhanded neo-religious faith, Lowell Lee Andrews insisted there was no purpose in his life and took out those responsible for his suffering as he saw it. In my view, these individuals are arguments against the life is shit thesis. Anne Frank in an obviously positive way, although it might verge on mysticism, and Lowell Lee in an obviously concretely negative manner, the very repulsiveness of his act becoming the negation of the negation in classical dialectics. So, I'd like to hear why Anne Frank, under her conditions, is wrong to maintain a stubborn belief in life goodness. A sensation of its positive feature, and why Lowell Lee Andrews doesn't really embody the philosophic endgame of life's just a bitch and then you die. Some of you may have had to deal with suicidal people, watched and listened to them struggle with reasons they should continue, rather than just cash in. It comes down to defiance. To not let the forces of self-destruction or outside oppression have the satisfaction of your surrender. To go ungentle and unresisting into the night. Knock upon my telephonic apparatus while I'm conducting a YouTube session. How very rude. Hello? Who? Speak up, man. We got a bad line. Do what? Oh, Leon Trotsky. As in the Russian communist Jew, Bolshevik? Well, what's up, Lev Davidovich? Just wanted to make our viewers aware of your testament on this issue. Do I have it? Well, of course. You don't think I come to these videos unprepared, do you? Got it right here. And I quote, "My high and still rising blood pressure is deceiving those near me about my actual condition. I am active and able to work, but the outcome is evidently near." Natasha, who was Mrs. Trotsky, has just come to the window from the courtyard and opened it wider so that the air may enter more freely into my room. I can see the bright green strip of grass beneath the wall and the clear blue sky above the wall and sunlight everywhere. Life is beautiful. Let the future generations cleanse it of all evil, oppression, and violence and enjoy it to the full. Signed by you at Mexico City, February 27th, 1940. Okay, and then an agent of Joseph Stalin plowed an ice pick into the back of your head. So doesn't that negate your hope for the triumph of life's innate goodness? Your semi-religious, semi-mystical faith? After all, Stalin died peacefully of a stroke at his country estate with no one threatening him. Well, yes, you knew you were going to die anyway. So the point was to live life the best you can under your circumstances and to change your circumstances for the better, to the best of your ability. Like Marx said, it's not enough to understand the world, but to change it.